In addition to the appearances of Jesus outside the tomb or to Mary Magdalene, and then also later to the apostles, there are a couple of episodes where Jesus rises from the dead and events are described. There are two events in particular. One where Jesus is talking to Peter, and another one where Jesus is walking with two men. And those I'm going to come to next week. We're going to talk about those events. But in the meantime, I just want to make some concluding thoughts about the idea of Jesus having risen from the dead, that Jesus was actually resurrected. The first thing is that the resurrection is really something new. It's not something that we've seen before. It's different. Again, it's different from Lazarus being risen from the dead. Jesus is not only human, because when he is risen, he appears out of nowhere and he vanishes almost just as quickly. There is a time where the 11 apostles are hidden away from the authorities out of fear for themselves being crucified, where Jesus just appears to them out of nowhere despite the doors being locked. Another time when Jesus appears to them in that locked room, it says that they were terrified and thought they had seen a ghost. So Jesus is different than just being a regular, normal human being. And then finally, Jesus doesn't die a normal death, another physical death like Lazarus would have done. Jesus doesn't die a physical death. Instead, it says that he ascended into heaven, that he is lifted up into heaven. At the same time, Jesus is not only divine. Jesus is not only like a ghost, because he has a physical body. When they are in that locked room, Jesus asks them for something to eat, and they give him a piece of fish, and he eats it in front of them. So it's kind of Jesus confirming to them that I'm not a ghost. I am human still, and I do need to eat. Jesus is showing that human side of his. Jesus also shows them his wounds, his hands, and the stab wound on his side. And in one of these events, Thomas is not present when Jesus does this. Thomas is out for some unknown reason. And when he returns and the apostles tell him that they had seen the risen Lord, he says, I'm not going to believe it until I can actually touch the wounds of Jesus. And so then Jesus does appear in front of Thomas, and Jesus says to him, go ahead and touch my wounds. And Thomas really does us a favor with this, because in a sense, he expresses any doubt that we might have by simply listening to the Gospels, by simply reading it. We can put ourselves in Thomas's place and point to him and say, see, even Thomas didn't believe, and yet he does us a favor by proving it to us that Jesus was actually a physical person. And then there's another time where Jesus eats breakfast with Peter and the disciples on the shore while they are out fishing. So my point being that the risen Jesus is something new. And it really reminds us again about the incarnation, that Jesus is fully human and fully divine. Remember that the word incarnation, that I gave you an easy way of remembering it, was to think of the word enfleshment, right? The word taking on flesh, Jesus taking on flesh. That the word, the second person of the Trinity, takes on flesh, the word in the flesh. It's the incarnation is God speaking in a human language. And so, yet there is a physical change. There is a change in the physical aspect of Jesus. Remember that Mary doesn't recognize him at first until he speaks. And I think we can all kind of identify with this when you grow up and you look different, maybe to your grammar school teachers, or you haven't seen a family member in a really long time. Especially you at your age, you're growing so quickly that when a relative sees you, they may not recognize you at first. But when you begin to talk, and the relative really looks closely at you, then suddenly they recognize you very often because of your voice. But at first they don't recognize you because you're so different. And this might be something very similar to the way Jesus looks. He has been transformed. He maybe looks, like when somebody is really happy, their face just is transformed and they look more beautiful than if they had been frowning. So Jesus's body looks different. Okay, and so it's almost as if, think about when Jesus was a child and how we said that so much of Jesus was human at that time, a baby having to learn to walk and having to learn to obey his parents and all of the physical things that normal people grow through. But yet that Jesus remained divine, but he had emptied himself of the privileges of being divine, right? He didn't perform miracles as a child. He grew like a normal child. It's almost as if with the resurrection that the roles are reversed. It's almost as if we see Jesus more as divine and then glimpses of his humanity. So he's more spirit-like because he is coming and going, yet he's making it clear that he is still human. Like when he was a child, when he was that 12-year-old boy, he was a normal 12-year-old boy, but we saw a glimpse of his divinity when he's in the temple teaching his elders. It's almost like the opposite now. He's gone to the other side of that spectrum where now seems to be more divine, and that his humanity is that we are glimpsing his humanity. But remember, again, it's not that he is more divine and less human now. It's that he is fully human, fully divine. It's just that we seem to see a little bit more, notice more of that divinity. And so, the theology of the resurrection, what does that tell us about Jesus being God? It confirms to us that Jesus is actually divine, that Jesus is not just any other human being. He's truly different than any other human being, that he is confirmed as the Son of God. And it reminds us that as Jesus being the second person of the Trinity, that he is that one person in that Trinity. He is a reminder that the Trinity is three persons in one God. When we see Jesus risen from the dead, we know that he is indeed one of those persons in the one God. We believe that the resurrection is true, that it really happened. And if we do believe that the resurrection is true, then we can also make the assumption that all of Jesus's teachings are true. If Jesus is divine, as shown to us in the resurrection, then we can trust his teachings, that those are teachings not just from this wonderful man Jesus, this human being Jesus, this Jesus of Nazareth, but these are the teachings coming right down to us from the Father. And then one last thing is that the resurrection teaches us about the Paschal mystery. The Paschal mystery is the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Jesus lived, Jesus died, and Jesus rose again. It tells us that suffering can be endured because there is something after. We don't just stop, even ourselves, we don't just stop at life and death. We may not be risen from the dead like Jesus, but that there is life after death, a kind of resurrection for us, and that life after death brings us hope. It tells us, reminds us that when we are asked to do what is right, it's that one of the motivations for all of us is knowing that there will be a judgment. And so I am all the more going to be good in my life and live my life to the fullest, knowing that at some point God's judgment will come upon me and I will be called to account for my life. And so the resurrection teaches us, the bottom line is that there is a Paschal mystery in all of our lives. Jesus lived, died, and rose from the dead. And even in my own life, there are things that I die to, like you died to grammar school. You die to some of your old habits, and that we rise into something new. You've risen into high school. We die to our childhood. We rise into adulthood. When I got married, I died to being a single woman, and I rose into something new, a new kind of married life. Um, when you graduate from college, you die to being a child that doesn't quite have a purpose in life or know the direction in life, and you rise into an adult that is never stops growing, but has a good sense of who they are and what their purpose in life is going to be. So the Paschal mystery is something that we all live.